Hi guys, in this video I'm going to go over a section of development dynamics, which is unit 1, and it's the little bit in the book about global inequality. So I'm just going to go over with you what happened in the past and what's happening now in terms of how unequal the world is. So it starts off in the book in the 1980s and it shows a diagram of the world, and it's divided into the rich north and the poor south, and that line that divides the north from the south is what we call the Brandt line. Now that was something that was applicable during the 1980s and before, because really we had a two-speed world. We had the north of North America, Europe, and also Australasia and Japan, which were the rich countries, and then we had the poorer countries in the world, which were the low-income countries, which were South America, Asia and Africa really, and parts of the Middle East, etc. So that's how the world was divided in the past, and there was a lot of disparity between those two countries. Now, roll on another 30 years or so, and from 1980s onwards, we've had globalization happening, which means that we've had lots and lots of TNCs move from the northern areas of the world, from Europe and America, and they've moved to Asia. We've had a global shift. Now, that's because it's cheaper labour there, it's cheaper land, and there's less regulations for your company, etc. So companies can make more money. So those companies have moved abroad, and what that's done is that's kind of lifted some of those lower income countries up in terms of development. So now we've kind of got lots of different groups along the spectrum of development. So we've still got the low-income countries, which I would suggest were many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, certain countries in Asia and certain countries in South America. Then we've got the mint countries, which are Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria and Turkey. And they are countries that have had FDI in them fairly recently and are starting to improve from a development point of view and an economic point of view. We've then got our middle income countries, which used to be low income, but because of FDI and the movement, the global shift of manufacturing, they have improved immensely. So that would be Brazil, India and China, which have had huge amounts of FDI, foreign direct investment, and huge amounts of TNCs move into those countries and helping them develop. And we've got Russia there as well, which has kind of gone into decline in a lot of ways, so we won't go into that in too much detail. Then we've got the Asian tigers, which are 4 countries in Asia, or principalities or areas really, and that's Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore and South Korea. Now these have had a lot of American investment. A little bit complicated. If you want to check that out, maybe go and have a look at one of my A-level videos. But essentially after the Second World War, the Americans wanted to make sure that communism didn't spread too much in Asia, and they weren't part of it because they had China and Russia over there with communism as the major government forces. So the Americans invested heavily into these countries to help them develop, and they've continued to develop. And then at the top you've still got the HICs, which is still North America and Europe, and Japan and Australasia. So due to TNC investments, etc., we have improved the economy of a lot of these countries. We've done a lot of negative things as well, but overall we have now got more of a range of countries, more diversity. However, you could argue from a development gap point of view that the disparity, the difference between the very poor and the very rich is actually much wider now. So although we've got more countries that have been lifted out of poverty because of TNC investment, we've probably got in the rural areas, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, we've got huge amounts of poverty, and the rich have got much richer than they were in the 60s, 70s and 80s. So you could argue that TNC investment has led to more global inequality. Although many countries have become richer and people in cities within those countries in China and India, etc., have got richer, there has been a bigger gap now. There is a bigger gap. That development gap is wider, and the poorest to the richest, there's a lot more difference between them than there was in the past. So that is global inequality. It still exists. You could argue the gap between rich and poor here was smaller, and you could argue that the gap between rich and poor here is much wider, although many more people have been lifted out of abject poverty because of TNC investment and FDI. So that is global inequality.